our DNA.
Join the conversation.
Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. This is Gravitas with a new look, but the same old spirit. Let's get started. Are India and the US preparing for a war in the Indo-Pacific? That's the question we are asking tonight on Gravitas. Reports talk of an audit being carried out of the Kolkata port. Officials in India and the US are studying whether the Kolkata port can host US Navy vessels for repair and maintenance work. But the question is, why Kolkata? Its port is at the northern end of the Bay of Bengal. The shipyards in Visakhapatnam and Chennai are much closer to the Indian Ocean. Why does the US Navy want to send its ships all the way up to Kolkata? In the last 12 months, the US has entered into warship repair agreements with multiple Indian ports. How should one read this development? Is this America endorsing Indian repair technology? Yes, it is. And do such agreements help India's indigenous production goals? Yes, they do. But is there more to this story? Do the developments also hint at a possible preparation for war? Are India and the US preparing for a war at sea? We explored that and more in our top story tonight. Also on the show for you, we ask, were COVID-19 vaccines dangerous for your health? After AstraZeneca's admission of rare side effects, in India, parents of a deceased woman who allegedly passed away after taking Covishield have reportedly decided to take legal action against the Serum Institute. Do the benefits of the vaccines still outweigh the risk? Will AUKUS soon become SAUKUS? South Korea's defense minister has said that Seoul is considering sharing advanced military technology with the UK, the US and Australia. In what can only be described as economic dementia, US President Joe Biden has accused India of xenophobia. Not just that, Biden claims xenophobia is why Indian economy supposedly is not doing too well. On Gravitas tonight, we fact-check the US President's remarks. Also coming up for you on the show, are chemical weapons being used in Ukraine? We take a deep dive in our brand new segment. Are India and the US preparing for war in the Indian Ocean? Reports say officials in India and the US are currently auditing the Kolkata port. What for, you ask? The possibility of a Master Ship Repair Agreement, or MSRA. It's a legally non-binding agreement, one that's signed between the US Navy and private shipbuilding contractors for the repair of US Navy vessels. Basically, the US is looking to repair its naval vessels in the Kolkata port. Now, this is where Kolkata is on the map, in the extreme north of the Bay of Bengal. Why does a US Navy ship need to sail all the way up to Kolkata when India has facilities in Visakhapatnam near Chennai? Why Kolkata then? Unless the story here goes beyond the ship repairing. In July 2023, the US signed a deal with Larsen & Toubro. The Kattupalli shipyard near Chennai became a master shipyard for the US naval ships. The 5-year deal made Kattupalli the first master shipyard for US naval ships. And after the agreement was signed, the US Consul General in Chennai, Judith Ravin, said, and I'm quoting here, "This agreement will serve to strengthen our nation's strategic partnership and contribute to a free and open Indo-Pacific." Now, cut to September 2023, Mazgaon Dock and the US signed the MSRA. In April this year, US Navy entered into MSRA with the Cochin shipyard. This was the third MSRA with the United States. And now you have talks of a possible agreement involving the Kolkata port. Reports say Goa shipyard too is also being considered, as is the Pipavav shipyard. So what really is happening? What do you make of these agreements? The US is clearly keen to make India a hub for its ship repairs in this part of the world. In fact, in June last year, Pentagon's press secretary, Pat Ryder, had said that the US aims to make India a logistics hub for America and its partners. Let me read out his statement for you. "We intend to support India in the creation of logistics, repair, maintenance infrastructure for aircraft and ships. That is obviously something that will be important as we work together to preserve a free and open Indo-Pacific." Now, this is also an endorsement of Indian repair technology. There is no doubt that India's repair facilities are world-class. It is capable of undertaking ship repair and refits, and such agreements help India's indigenous production goals as well. The government of India, in fact, has pushed for defense shipyard as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme. India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh has been pushing for India to become an indigenous shipbuilding hub. So these agreements are definitely in India's favour. They are a win for India. But like I was asking you, is there more to the story? Now, if you notice, both of the US officials, the Pentagon press secretary and the US Consul General in Chennai, mentioned a free and open Indo-Pacific. You see, one cannot ignore the presence of a common adversary in this part of the world. Of course, I'm talking about China, the expansionist, aggressive China. It's not just provoking India in the Himalayas, but also provoking countries at sea. Chinese activities around Taiwan are on the rise, as are incidents of face-off between China and the Philippines. Earlier this week itself, Chinese Coast Guard once again fired water cannons at the Philippine vessel near the Scarborough Shoal. Manila summoned the Chinese envoy. It accused China of harassment and dangerous maneuvers. It was the Philippines' 20th protest this year against the Chinese Coast Guard and Chinese fishing vessels. In the last 2 years, Manila has made a total of 153 complaints, 153 of them. These numbers are not comforting, are they? If anything, they point at the worsening of the status quo at sea and of possible dangerous escalations. And guess what? The US has pledged to defend both Taiwan and Manila if the need arises. For long now, signs have been pointing at a wider war at sea, with experts saying that the sea is where the next big war would be fought. India is commissioning new naval bases, modernizing its infrastructure. China is aggressively expanding its navy. Its advanced third aircraft carrier just began sea trials. We told you about the Fujian yesterday. The US, on the other hand, is fighting serving backlog at home. It is looking for new shipyards. It's looking to sign deals with as many Indian shipyards as possible. And this not just helps reduce the burden at home, but also enables the US ships to stay in the Indo-Pacific for longer. Which then brings me back to my question. Are these ship repair agreements pointing at war preparation? And even if they are, should you be surprised? India and the US have steadily been working together in preparation for the worst. The two strategic partners, information sharing, sharing critical defense technology. There is already an agreement in place allowing America to refuel in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. In the year 2020, a US long-range maritime patrol aircraft refueled at Andaman and Nicobar Islands. The fully armed P-8 Poseidon aircraft landed in Port Blair during the peak of the Ladakh standoff and months after the Galwan skirmish. Cut to present, 3 US naval ships have already been repaired in Kattupalli. In a first, a British Royal Naval ship also arrived in Kattupalli for repair. It happened early this year. In March, the UK's LRG, or Littoral Response Group, arrived in Chennai. The British Navy ships conducted maritime exercise with the Indian Navy, and then the UK High Commission said that the ships would undergo essential maintenance near Chennai. A defense advisor of the British High Commission told the media that the visit of the Littoral Response Group attests to the UK's capability and commitment to the Indo-Pacific. In other words, this is not a black and white story. This is about logistics and maintenance. It is a story of the fast-changing geopolitics, about the preparation for the worst, a possible war at sea. Just look at where India's Andaman and Nicobar Islands are on the map. That's very close to the Malacca Strait. 80% of China's imported oil, in fact, passes through this stretch of water. You see the Indian leverage. The US needs India if it wants to counter China. It needs to work with India if it wants to win a war against China at sea. And speaking of potential conflict with China, Indo-Pacific countries are preparing for the worst. In the latest, South Korea has expressed interest in joining AUKUS, a trilateral security partnership between Australia, the US, and the UK that is aimed at boosting cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. After Japan, Canada, and New Zealand expressed interest in becoming a member, South Korea wants in. It is considering collaborating with AUKUS on military technology. On Wednesday, South Korea confirmed that talks are on with AUKUS members. After taking part in a 2+2 meeting in Australia, South Korean Defense Minister Shin Won-sik said, and I'm quoting, Korea's defense, science and technology capabilities will contribute to the peace and stability of the development of AUKUS Pillar 2 and regional peace. Now, here's the thing. Neither South Korea, Japan, or any other country interested in joining AUKUS will play a role in the original task of the grouping that was unveiled in 2021. And what was that task, you ask? It was the arming of Australia with nuclear power submarines. Instead, now, interested countries would participate in a new element of AUKUS. They call it Pillar 2. It's a broader effort among US-friendly governments to jointly make high-tech weapons like hypersonic missiles, underwater drones, cyber technology as well. What is all this in preparation of, really? No points for guessing. It is in preparation of a large-scale combat in the Indo-Pacific. As I said earlier, countries are preparing for the worst. South Korea, Japan, Australia, India, Taiwan, China have all boosted their naval power as they jostle for supremacy in the region. You see, China's aggressive moves and repeated provocations in the region have all the neighbors worried. A new era of arms race is now in full swing. Let's start with South Korea. Last year, Seoul developed and tested the world's first conventionally powered ballistic missile submarine. And now South Korea, one of the few countries in the world with this capability. The country is also developing its own supersonic long-range cruise missile. Seoul is not waiting for foreign purchases. It is relying heavily on its own high-tech industries. It's not the only country rearming. Japan has been quietly building up its armed forces as well as its military-industrial complex. In fact, it now builds some of the most advanced conventional submarines in the world. Its Soryu-class submarines are as impressive as deadly underwater. The country also recently unveiled its upgraded aircraft carrier. The JS Kaga can host up to 28 fighter jets. That too F-35B stealth jets. The US will be sending 105 of these fifth-generation jets to Japan soon, and Japan is also buying long-range anti-ship missiles, which will give it an advantage in any future war fought in the Pacific. All things considered, it's a major shift for Japan. As far as its defense policy is concerned, Japan claims a set of uninhabited islands it calls Senkaku. So does China. They call these islands Diaoyu. Repeated overflights by Chinese military aircraft are matched by Japanese patrols, each trying to show the other that they are willing to fight for what is theirs. Even Russia, in fact, claims sovereignty over what Japan calls northern territories. Russia calls it Kuril Islands. Taken by the Soviet Union in the closing days of World War II, Russia has reinforced its military in the Kuril Islands. And now Japan is reinforcing its southern islands with troops and missile batteries in case China makes a move to invade Taiwan. With China looking primed to invade, Taiwan has also embarked on its own armaments program. Taipei plans to build a fleet of its own submarine and is doubling its capacity to build long-range missiles. There is a pattern here. In an increasingly uncertain world, all of America is arming to protect themselves. With defense agreements forming across the region, India, a key player in the region, is also enhancing maritime pacts. Take the Quad, for example. It includes India, the US, Japan, and Australia. India has first-hand experience in dealing with a belligerent China. And amid rising tensions between the two countries in the Himalayas, India has ramped up military exercises with Quad members. New Delhi has also given new impetus to its own naval programs, as well as its ability to project combat power. With the induction of indigenously built aircraft carrier INS Vikrant, India placed itself among the world's naval elites. Meanwhile, US naval might needs no explanation. To put it simply, Indo-Pacific countries are arming themselves, forging closer ties with each other to counter China's increasing assertiveness in the region. It is a deterrence measure against future conflicts. And it is a message: do not provoke us to fight. Let's now look at some of the other stories coming up for you on the show tonight. A second Boeing whistleblower has died in less than 2 months. Joshua Dean, who raised safety concerns about Boeing's 737 MAX plane, has died after a sudden illness. A mystery message from space has reached planet Earth from 226 million kilometers away. Who is the sender? What is the message about? This is a story you do not want to miss. Were COVID-19 vaccines dangerous for your health? Scary reports are emerging. Old patients are raising new questions. It all started with AstraZeneca's legal files. AstraZeneca, like most of you know, is a British-Swedish pharma giant. When the virus from China jumped borders, AstraZeneca collaborated with the University of Oxford to make COVID-19 vaccine. This vaccine was known as AZD1222. These jabs were sold around the world. The AstraZeneca vaccine was also manufactured in India. Here it was known as Covishield. Now, in a legal document submitted to a British court, AstraZeneca has admitted that its COVID vaccine could cause blood clot-related side effects in rare cases. Yes, they are saying that this is rare, but remember that the story begins with them saying that there were no such side effects. Now, we are not going to pass quick judgments, of course. There was an unprecedented international crisis, and Big Pharma surely did its best to help. But the after effects have raised questions which cannot be ignored. We first told you about the story on Monday, but let me read out from AstraZeneca's legal files once again. It is admitted that the AstraZeneca vaccine can, in very rare cases, cause TTS. The causal mechanism is not known. Now, TTS is short for thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome. It involves the formation of blood clots and a fall in the platelet count. The blood clots can appear in the brain or abdomen. The symptoms of TTS include blurred vision, severe headache, difficulty speaking, chest pain, shortness of breath, abdominal pain, swelling in the legs. Many people who took the AstraZeneca vaccine claim they were diagnosed with TTS. And Jamie Scott is among them. He has lodged a case against AstraZeneca. Scott was 44 when he received the vaccine. 10 days after the jab, he complained of tiredness and started vomiting. And soon after, his speech was impaired. When he was hauled to the hospital, doctors diagnosed him with a suspected case of TTS. After Scott, 51 such cases have been lodged against AstraZeneca. And the news of these cases is making headlines again. People are asking whether the benefits of the COVID-19 vaccines still outweigh the risks. Concerns grew over blood clots. As early as 2021, reports began circulating of vaccine recipients developing blood clots. In Germany, the country's vaccine regulator, the Paul Ehrlich Institute, was calling for further investigation into the cases, which brings us to part 2 of this story, the German files. Unlike the AstraZeneca court files, this is the side of the story that not many people know about. In Germany, an online magazine fought for the disclosure of documents from Robert Koch Institute, federal government agency and research institute. It is responsible for disease control and prevention. The magazine, called Multipolar, wanted to know on what basis and on what scientific ground COVID-19 regulations like lockdown and masking were imposed. Last year, Multipolar was sent 2,500 pages of RKI's COVID-19 protocols. But guess what? The files were heavily redacted. In fact, 1/3 of the file was redacted. What for? Were German authorities hiding something? You see, the point I'm trying to make here is simple. Times like these call for utmost transparency. In times like these, where negative sentiment about the COVID-19 vaccine is spreading, the onus falls on the authorities to clear the air, because only answers will put an end to uncomfortable questions. Only answers will ensure that people don't start panicking and doubting the vaccines and their decision to get jabbed. Because you see, that can be very dangerous, and it can come in the way of future vaccination drives. Which is why on Gravitas tonight, we are demanding answers. Were the COVID-19 vaccines dangerous for our health? Or did the benefits outweigh the risks? For the longest time, the words used to describe COVID-19 vaccines were safe, reliable, effective. And I'm not just talking about vaccines from one pharma house here. Over 13 billion doses of COVID vaccines have been administered around the world. 2.2 billion doses of vaccines were taken in India. People are still getting vaccinated. And why not? COVID-19 vaccines are supposed to reduce the chances of severe COVID, of hospitalization, of deaths. Look at what the World Health Organization says. COVID-19 vaccines provide protection against severe disease and death resulting from COVID-19 infection. Look at what America's Centers of Disease Control and Prevention continues to say. Vaccination remains the safest strategy for avoiding hospitalizations, long-term health outcomes, and death. If these claims still hold true, then it's time to reinstill this point with scientific evidence. It's time to quell the fast-growing suspicion. And the people deserve that. Medical science and research deserve that. It is estimated that in India, Covishield was used to vaccinate 90% of the population. After AstraZeneca's admission in India, the parents of a woman who allegedly passed away after taking Covishield have reportedly decided to take legal action against the Serum Institute. A petition has also been filed in India's top court. The petitioner wants an expert panel to examine the side effects of the Covishield vaccine. In addition, the plea seeks a vaccine damage payment system for those who, quote-unquote, got severely disabled as a result of a vaccine drive during COVID-19. As per reports, AstraZeneca said in a statement, and I'm quoting again, "Our sympathy goes out to anyone who has lost loved ones or reported health problems." You see, India rolled out the world's biggest vaccination drive with the hope to save lives. India provided free vaccines to its people, streamlined the vaccination process with the help of digitization. India also helped other countries under the Vaccine Maitri program. What for? So that we could save as many people as possible. Did the vaccine makers play with the people's and the government's trust? Were the vaccines they sold dangerous for your health? These questions need to be answered, and the answers need to come in fast. Shifting focus now to the United States, its president seems to be suffering from economic dementia. Let me explain this. On Wednesday, the 81-year-old president of America, Joe Biden, passed a judgment on why Asian giants like India, China, Japan are, according to him, stalling economically. He says that it's because these countries are, quote-unquote, xenophobic, meaning prejudiced against people from other countries. You heard that right. Joe Biden, who is seeking a second term in office, said this at an event marking the start of AANHPI Heritage Month. It stands for Asian American, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander. Arguing that immigrants have made the U.S. stronger, Biden said that the alleged anti-immigrant attitude in Asian countries is the reason for the economic troubles. Biden, who is up against Republican candidate and ex-president of the U.S., Donald Trump, has often criticized him for his anti-immigrant rhetoric. While Trump blames immigrants for America's problems, Biden claims to have taken a more humane stance on the issue. Now, quick question here. Who is going to tell him about the criticism he is facing at home over immigration? Is America under the Biden administration really immigrant-friendly? Do we need to remind Biden about the thousands of migrants stranded at the Mexican border without food and shelter? Do we need to explain how inhumane U.S. policies have fueled this unprecedented situation at America's border? I won't answer that. I'll let the pictures on your screen do the talking. Biden's voters know this. A recent poll, in fact, revealed that Americans rated immigration as the top problem. A very small percentage of Americans expressed approval for the way Biden dealt with the border issue. This is yet another example of America acting like the model police of the world. We've seen it play out a number of times. Still, if the U.S. president is so convinced that economies like India are struggling, let's do a quick fact check here. According to the International Monetary Fund, India will see 7.8% GDP growth this year. In fact, the IMF noted that economic activity in Asia outperformed expectations in the second half of 2023, despite challenges. And here's more. While the US economy grew at the slowest pace since 2022 in the last quarter, the Indian economy grew by 8.4%. Reports suggest that the US economy looks like it is in a recession. Despite the Wall Street's upbeat outlook, a downturn is evident in America's weakening job market. Lower payrolls, layoffs, unemployment have inched higher in recent months. Let's not even get into the ballooning U.S. debt levels. It's at a record high of $34.5 trillion. Yes, the U.S. remains the undisputed heavyweight, but the Indian economy is doing incredibly well. It has twin advantages of a young and large population. It is the fastest growing major economy in the world. It is expected to become the world's third largest by 2030. It is poised to surpass China and the US by the end of the century. More importantly, it certainly does not need lectures from the US on anything, let alone immigration. After all, India is the champion of Atiti Devo Bhava. It's Sanskrit for the guest is God. Joe Biden has himself experienced this firsthand whenever he has visited India. The question is, did Joe Biden score a self-goal by talking down to some of America's closest allies? Let's now shift our focus to the war in Ukraine. Has it turned into chemical warfare? I'm asking this question because a war of words has broken out over the alleged use of chemical weapons in Ukraine. Are chemical weapons indeed being used? And what are chemical weapons? What are the international rules around this? In this edition of Gravitas Deep Dive, we tell you all about it. On Wednesday, the US accused Russia of violating the international chemical weapons ban by deploying the choking agent called chloroprixin against Ukrainian troops. The US State Department said in a statement, and I'm quoting, "The use of such chemicals is not an isolated incident and is probably driven by Russian forces' desire to dislodge Ukrainian forces from fortified positions and achieve tactical gains on the battlefield." Now, what exactly is chloroprixin? It is a banned choking agent. It has been used in war before. The German forces had fired the gas against Allied troops during World War I. And earlier this month, Ukrainian military accused Russia of using the chemical weapon as it presses its biggest advances in eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian military says that in addition to it, Russian forces have used grenades loaded with CS and CN gases. Ukraine says that at least 500 Ukrainian soldiers have been treated for exposure to toxic substances. Now, what does Russia have to say about these allegations? Moscow vehemently denies it. The Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov rejected the claims by the US, calling them absolutely baseless.
We have seen the news about it. As usual, these announcements are groundless. Russia was and remains committed to its obligations in respect of international law in the sphere mentioned.
Moscow has accused the Ukrainian forces of staging chemical weapons incidents with a view to blaming Russia for them. The Russian Foreign Ministry said in late February that the use of toxic chemicals by the Ukrainians has become systematic. Russia has accused Ukraine of using improvised drone-dropped chemical weapons. Russia said that the first recorded instance of Ukraine using chloroprixin was during the siege of the House of Trade Unions in Odessa in 2014. Now, while the two sides argue, here's what you should know about chemical weapons. Like nuclear weapons and biological weapons, chemical weapons are weapons of mass destruction. It has been used in war times. It was first used in World War II and then in the Iran-Iraq War and the Syrian Civil War. During the Cold War, the US and the erstwhile Soviet Union built up enormous stockpiles of chemical weapons. Further, there are many types of chemical weapons. There are choking agents, blister agents, blood agents, nerve agents, riot control agents. Chloroprixin is a riot control agent. On September 3, 1992, the United Nations Conference on Disarmament adopted the Chemical Weapons Convention, or CWC. It entered into force on 29 April 1997. It bans the production and use of chemical weapons. It also requires the 193 countries that have ratified the convention, which include Russia and the US, to destroy any stocks of banned chemicals. Back to the present, the US State Department is expected to convey its determination that Russia has violated the CWC to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Both Russia and Ukraine have accused each other of using the chemical weapon in the 2 years of war, but the organization says it has not been formally asked to open an investigation into the use of prohibited substances in Ukraine. On that note, we're taking a very short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thanks very much for staying on with us. You are watching Gravitas. India has voiced hope for Palestine. It has called for Palestine's bid to become a full member of the United Nations to be reconsidered. Let me give you some context here first. Last month, the UN Security Council voted on the Palestinian appeal to join the bloc. 12 nations voted in Palestine's favor. Switzerland and the UK abstained, while the US vetoed it. Now, Palestine only needed 9 votes in favor, but there was another condition. None of the 5 permanent members, that is China, France, Russia, the UK, the US, should veto the appeal. Palestine failed to achieve that. Hence, its entry into the United Nations was denied. But now, India's permanent representative to the UN, Ruchira Kamboj, has said, and I'm quoting, quote unquote, "I would like to state here at the very outset that in keeping with India's long-standing position, we hope that this would be reconsidered in due course and that Palestine's endeavor to become a member of the United Nations will get endorsed." She also added, India is committed to supporting a 2-state solution where the Palestinian people are able to live freely in an independent country within secure borders with due regard to the security needs of Israel. Why are Boeing whistleblowers mysteriously dying? Another one has passed away. His name was Joshua Dean. He worked as a quality auditor at Boeing. He too, like other whistleblowers, raised concerns about Boeing's safety issues. And now he has been reported dead. He's the second one to die in as many months. What is happening? How did Dean die? Reports say due to a sudden fast-spreading infection, his aunt and sister took to social media to share the news. They said that Dean had contracted pneumonia last month and suffered from MSRA infection. All of this led to a stroke and Dean's unexpected deaths. And this has once again drawn attention to Boeing. The carrier hired him back in 2019. He was a mechanical engineer with years of experience. He took care of the quality checks at Boeing supplier Spirit Aerosystems. And during his tenure, he leveled some serious accusations against Boeing. In fact, he was one of the first to raise such concerns. He accused Spirit Aerosystems of ignoring defects in the production of the 737 MAX, the same series whose reputation has been marred by a string of crashes and safety issues recently. Dean flagged concerns around manufacturing to management. He documented his observations, including improperly drilled holes in the AFT pressure bulkhead, a crucial component for maintaining cabin pressure. But he claimed that nothing was done, so he decided to move forward alone. He filed a complaint against Spirit with the Federal Aviation Administration. And guess what? The investigation concluded that Dean's allegations had substance, but it did not provide further details. Later on, he was fired from his position after being accused of failing to spot a manufacturing flaw. Dean, however, maintained that this was false justification. Now, before Dean, it was John Barnett. He worked for Boeing for more than 30 years. From 2010, he was employed as a quality manager at the North Charleston plant. This facility built the 787 Dreamliner. Barnett retired from his position in 2017. And 2 years later, he revealed that under pressure, workers had been deliberately fitting substandard parts to aircraft on the production line. He had also claimed of finding serious problems with oxygen systems, and it could mean 1 in 4 breathing masks would not work in an emergency. That was the claim. One of his most alarming accusations was that workers allegedly scavenged for substandard parts that had been tossed into scrap bins and fitted them in planes to prevent production delays. In the days before his death, he had been giving evidence in a whistleblower lawsuit against the company. You know what happened next? We reached out to Boeing following the news of John Barnett's death, and here's what it told WION. I'm quoting here. Our thoughts are with Josh Dean's family. This sudden loss is stunning news here at Spirit and for his loved ones, unquote. What exactly is happening? Why are Boeing whistleblowers mysteriously dying? Another Boeing whistleblower, Sam Salipur, appeared before the US lawmakers last month. He had worked as an engineer at Boeing for 4 decades. When he became a quality engineer on the 787 Dreamliner, he noticed issues with the aircraft's shimming. Salipur made alarming revelations before the US Congress. But here's what he also said. During the hearing, the whistleblower said he was receiving physical threats for speaking up. Are the aliens trying to communicate with us? And if they do, how would they talk to us? Well, they could be sending messages that would be captured by big radio antennas. But recently, something amazing happened. Our next report tells you how NASA received a laser-coded message from deep space. Take a look.
Are human beings alone in the universe? Are there extraterrestrial beings? And if they are trying to communicate to us, will they send a message through the immense depth of the interstellar space? Questions that have survived unanswered down the ages. Now, from 226 million kilometers away, NASA has just received a laser message. But don't you get carried away yet. It is not aliens. There's a simpler explanation. NASA's Psyche spacecraft transmitted the laser from its current location, 226 million kilometers away, in the asteroid belt between the planets Mars and Jupiter. In October 2023, NASA sent the space mission towards an asteroid, Psyche 16. The asteroid is primarily composed of metal, a rarity in our solar system. Going back to the deep space message, it is a remarkable feat of the communication technology. Aboard the Psyche spacecraft, shattering records, it has proved its capability in transmitting messages from deep space using lasers. While the spacecraft's primary communication system relies on radio frequency, the optical communications demo has showcased its potential as a game-changer in deep space communication. This technology could enable future deep space missions to carry more sophisticated instruments and send back substantially more data to Earth than currently possible. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Time now for Gravitas Recall. It's the 2nd of May. 13 years ago, on this very day, Osama bin Laden was killed. The man needs no introduction. He is one of the world's most wanted terrorists, He orchestrated the 9/11 attacks. The entire operation lasted only 40 minutes from start to finish, but it was the culmination of years of calculated planning and training. The mission was dubbed Operation Neptune Spear. It was approved by President Obama. Stealth Black Hawk helicopters took off from Afghanistan. They carried a group of 25 Navy SEALs. An hour and a half later, the choppers landed on the compound in Abbottabad. One helicopter crashed, but there were no injuries. The mission continued uninterrupted, and soon the fighters spotted Osama bin Laden. He was on the 3rd floor of the compound, and before you know it, he was shot in the head. Later at night, President Obama addressed the US about the raid, and just a few hours later, after midnight, Laden's body was buried at sea, complying with Islamic law. On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. This is me, Molly Gambhir, signing off. Thanks very much for watching. Know more, understand better, think ahead. Hello and a very warm welcome. You are watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Get the facts, not the bombast. On the 26th of March, dynamic pricing, Baloch separatists, Gravitas cuts out the clutter. Gravitas keeps calm when others scream. Gravitas brings news to life. Weekdays 9 p.m. IST, 3:30 p.m. GMT. Gravitas. Seeing is believing.
Over 200 people die following flash floods that rocked Kenya and Tanzania concurrently, with authorities announcing forceful evacuations of vulnerable residents. There is a new war front in Sudan. Brutal attacks by the Arab-dominated Rapid Support Forces on ethnic African civilians in Darfur has claimed thousands of lives. The United Nations sounds the alarm. And a former Kenyan rugby player turns into a roaming chef as he acquires TikTok fame. Dennis Ombachi will be featured on World of Africa at these times on WION World is One.
Know more, understand better, think ahead. Hello and a very warm welcome. You are watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Get the facts, not the bombast. On the 26th of March, dynamic pricing, Baloch separatists, Gravitas cuts out the clutter. Gravitas keeps calm when others scream. Gravitas brings news to life. Weekdays 9 p.m. IST, 3:30 p.m. GMT. Gravitas. Seeing is believing.
This week on the West Asia Post, Israeli tanks are waiting outside Gaza border. US says it remains opposed to Israel's Rafah invasion, and pressure is mounting on Netanyahu to free the hostages. Fears loom over a war spillover as Hezbollah launches its deepest attack on Israeli territory. Also on the show, we tell you about Iraq's strict clergy rules and how its harsh anti-gay law has caused alarm. All this and much more on the West Asia Post at these times only on WION. World is One.
The biggest democratic exercise on the planet ever. Decoding the multiple colors of this multi-dimensional, multi-layered spectacle. WION deciphers the images and the hues. Sifts real performance from rhetoric and noise, claims and counterclaims, populist pitches and hidden truths. Untangling, unraveling this celebration of democracy.
दीवारें पार नहीं की जाती, गिरा दी जाती है.
As Hira Mandi, the Diamond Bazaar, starts streaming online, we tell you about its creator, Sanjay Leela Bhansali, and explain his love for larger-than-life filmmaking. Get a roundup of the best Met Gala looks of all time.
You know you have to tell him sometime, right?
And meet American actor Sendhil Ramamurthy as he talks about his recent release, Do Aur Do Pyar. All this and much more with me, Isha Hanspal, on WION E Club at these times.
Economic turmoil and global unrest have cast a shadow over President Joe Biden's approval ratings.
The rockets are continuing to be fired by Hamas in Gaza, although at a slower rate than previously.